One consistent story that permeates throughout each region the traveler visits is how the Archons ascended to their thrones. A war lasting hundreds, if not thousands of years that pitched every living god of different moralities and dominions against each other until only a handful reigned supreme. We've all heard this story from many different perspectives and from the accounts of the victors themselves. But one thing about the Archon War still confuses me. What exactly was its true purpose? Before we get into that, if you want to see more Genshin Impact content, do consider subscribing to the channel. The Archon Wars were fought several hundred years before the current setting of the main story. Its initial premise, or one that we've been told several times, was that Celestia had 7 vacant seats, and the war was a huge battle royale to determine who would be worthy to occupy those seats. While the premise seemed to be simple enough, the whole affair was rather suspicious. The original prize was said to be 7 divine seats, yet none of the winners ended up in Celestia. Most of the Archons were instead given dominion over certain regions of Tevat and gifted the Gnosis as a mark of their sovereignty. Furthermore, it seems the whole idea is at odds with the entire system of allogenes. If the Archon Wars were meant to fill the 7 seats, why have all these humans suddenly started receiving visions? Does it mean more vacant seats are available? What about those we know that have directly ascended to Celestia, like Vanessa and Guhua? How are they different from the Archons? And did they have to wait for seats? Finally, and this is the clincher, the Archon Wars lasted around 2000 years before the last seat was claimed. Yet after the 7 were established, changes to the original 7 didn't seem like a big deal. I mean, if you look at the current roster of the 7, the only original members left are Barbatos and Morax, with the rest being largely replaced. So again, why would Celestia go through all this trouble of initiating the Archon Wars to then just not care about what happens after? On top of all of this, gods had existed long before the Archon Wars, and we know the only mark of an Archon is the possession of a Gnosis. So why was this process so important? Well, this is what we're gonna theorize about in this video, so put on your tinfoil hats and get a bucket of salt ready. The first idea that came to mind is the fact that perhaps there were just too many gods. Prior to the Archon Wars, gods had actually lived and commingled quite commonly in Tevat. Different regions had different circumstances, but generally speaking, there were many different good and evil gods. The Archon Wars could have been a scheme planned by those in Celestia to thin the herd, as it were, to reduce the overall number of gods so that only they would reign supreme. Think about the world of Tevat today. If you took away all the Archons, a god is a rather rare thing. Sure, there are oddities and godlike beings such as the Adepti, but most gods either perished or have left beyond the seas. Celestia could have masterminded this whole thing to ensure that no being could challenge them. It's possible that they wanted to ensure their place at the top of the food chain, and the existence of many gods could potentially cause them to rise up against Celestia. Although since we don't know what Celestia's role even is, it's difficult to guess why such an uprising would even happen. The second idea that came to mind is that what if this was yet another cycle in an endless cycle of sacrifice? Perhaps this has happened before many times in the past, and we're only told of the most recent occurrence. Think about the original reward, 7 vacant seats. Why were these seats vacant in the first place? Were these seats previously occupied by other gods, and if so, what happened to them? So there is a lot of mystery not only around the Archon War itself, but the whole 7-seat thing seems rather weird. If these seats were additions, then why need the Archon Wars at all, when others like Vanessa have ascended without the need to wait for a seat to open up? There is also other evidence that may support this being the nth iteration of a cycle. One very compelling evidence is the discovery of the Heart of Naberius by the alchemist Gold, who discovered this artifact during an excursion in an unnamed domain. The Heart of Naberius in the CN translation roughly means the Heart of God, which is the term similar in name to a Gnosis. But how could a Gnosis exist if the 7 were currently holding power at the time it was found? This again makes me think that this was a Gnosis from a leftover or previous iteration of the 7, one that had disappeared and caused the vacant seats to open up. Now, why this cycle exists, we don't really know. Any number of possible reasons could be plausible, but too little information exists at this time to make an educated guess. But the potential of a cycle of 7 Archons before the one we know may still be possible given the rediscovery of this artifact. The next theory on our Wheel of Fortune is that this has something to do with the 7 Sovereigns. In the book Before the Sun and the Moon, the world of Tevat was said to once belong to the dragons and bishops. Among them, the strongest were known as the 7 Sovereigns, 7 great dragons for each of the elements. When the Primordial One came, he went to war with them and pushed them back to the elemental realm and reshaped Tevat as he saw fit. Now, what you might not know about these dragons are that because they were largely elemental beings, they couldn't truly die. They would just re-manifest after a certain amount of time had passed. So perhaps the existence of the 7 Archons were meant as a way to prevent them from re-emerging. Maybe a substantially potent elemental existence is required to prevent these dragons from re-entering the human realm. This could be why the Archon War was needed to find the strongest elemental gods to take up this role. The problem with this theory is that while some attain the seat of Archon through sheer power, gods like Barbatos technically won by default with the defeat of Decarabian and the technical death of Andreas. I suppose he still is considered the strongest Anemo being with their deaths, but we can't know the rules around this for sure. Finally, the last theory we have is perhaps the death of the gods were needed to reshape the world into what it is today, or maybe they were used for something else. When each god dies, we know that their remains and power still lingers. This is largely what happened in Liyue and why the Yaksha were dispatched. Perhaps those in Celestia sought to collect large amounts of godly power for whatever nefarious reason, and what easier way than to have them kill each other. Now, you might think, well, this is the most outlandish one so far, since there isn't any precedent for the use of these dead god remains. Except there kinda is. It's the primary ingredient used by the Fatui to create their delusions. In fact, a lot of the activities we see the Fatui partake in involves the collection of dead god materials. Even the Doctor was conducting experiments with godly miasma on Kole and many other test subjects. So perhaps the Tsaritsa has realized what Celestia is actually up to and proceeded to do the same thing to challenge them. Now, keep in mind, this whole video is really just a theory ramble, and in truth, we don't know why the Archon Wars were initiated. Any one of these could be true, and maybe none of them are. But I think that this omission of detail as to the purpose of the Archon Wars is important, as it might indicate something about Tevat and how it functions, and revealing it at this stage in the story would spoil things down the road. And so it might continue to remain a mystery until we reach a certain point in the story where the truth will need to be revealed. That brings the video to an end though. If you enjoyed it, do remember to like and subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you in the next one. As usual, have a nice day.